Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth presentation in our series. There is feedback, so I can actually hear myself. Is there any way to turn that off? All right. Oh, good. It turned off. Thank you guys so much because that's really distracting. So, today we are going to talk about how to be relevant in the digital age through something that I call content evangelism. So, we're going to talk about how can you practically meet people where they are in their spiritual journey. And that is by creating content that addresses their felt needs. So, in previous sessions, we talked about understanding your audience, understanding those core values, those felt needs, those shared values and lived experiences, and what their daily challenges are. And so today we're going to talk about how to create content based on what you've discovered about your target audience. Because by doing this, we can actually cut through the clutter. As I said before, there's a lot of competition on, getting people's attention, trying to cut through the clutter. So in order to cut through the clutter, we have to be relevant. In order to be relevant, we have to understand what those felt needs are, because that is the model that Jesus set forth. He addressed their emotional, their physical, their mental, their spiritual felt need in the moment, and then he bid them how to, bid them to follow. So I'm going to unpack how pastors, or actually anybody, can embrace content evangelism, making faith relevant to a postmodern seeker. So let me see here. Let me start moving my slides. Okay, so we're gonna do a quick recap of the digital mission field, just so we understand why content evangelism is so important. We're going to talk about content evangelism. We're going to talk about some real life examples, and then we're going to do a little teaser for our final session on YouTube optimization, and then we'll of course have time for Q&A. So this might seem heretical to say, but have we been focused on church attendance for too long? As you guys have heard me say before, I believe, God doesn't cause the terrible things in the world, but I believe he uses them. And I believe he's using COVID to try and get us to figure out how to do church beyond the confines of time and space in a building. Because, when we're so focused on church attendance, oftentimes those long-term gains are lost over time. So we should be strategizing for long-term impact. And to do that, we have to meet people where they are. Now, it used to be that to hear the gospel message, people would have to travel sometimes long distances to one location to hear a preacher. But now we can browse preachers on YouTube in the convenience of our home, from the comfort of our couch, or we don't even have to get out of bed. And until recently, the barrier to entry was so high in publishing that only top theologians, pastors, and select authors could get their writings out to the public hands. You can now self-publish on Amazon, and it's really high quality. So with the advent of social media, vlogs and blogs, we're all publishers now, and we can all publish, actual books as well. So we can each be distribution centers for our areas of digital influence. So basically, in summary, modern technologies have decentralized the message. So it might seem like this is a huge challenge. This might seem overwhelming. But again, I'm telling you, this is actually a powerful opportunity, because you, as pastors, as spiritual leaders, whatever role you're in, you're now empowered to share using the digital tools of your choice to reach more people than ever before and minister to them every day of the week. Because many of you are content creators. Every week you're creating great content, you're creating sermons. So let's talk about what opportunities we have with that, because ultimately we do not have a message problem. We have the gospel, the greatest story ever told, the message of Christ's birth, his life, his self-sacrificing death, his resurrection, and his soon return. As the Adventist church, we also have the three angels' message sent to all of God's children in every tribe, nation, tongue, and people. And we also have the gift of prophecy through Ellen White and the ministry of healing. We do not have a message problem. We have a packaging and distribution problem. A lot of the content that you are already creating is relevant and meaningful, but it's the way it's distributed and the way it's packaged. And, as I said previously, we are facing the biggest communication shift in 500 years. And just like when the Gutenberg press was developed and it revolutionized the world and the gospel, we need to embrace this digital revolution so that we can all have a role in, sort of this digital reformation for the gospel, for the truth. We've got to change and we've got to adapt. So, for pastors, for spiritual leaders, for those of you who are already creating content or want to create content, this means thinking of your sermon, your message's place in the digital evangelism and how it can be made findable. So basically, who are you speaking to? Who's your target audience? And then how do you position it so it can be found? Because ultimately, the average person spends more time online a day than they would ever spend inside your church. They spend between 9 and 18 hours a day behind a screen. And, only about 20% of professed Christians of Americans regularly attend church in person. And that was even before COVID. So it's clear we have to develop a strategy that's going to reach people every day of the week where they spend their time, and a strategy that's going to reach the 80% of people who don't regularly attend service. So this includes the unchurched, the formerly church, the unaffiliated, the people who are questioning and seeking. Because to reach seekers, we must not only go where they spend their time, but we have to use the language they use. And this is going to be sort of the important takeaway from this whole presentation, is using the language they use. And I'm going to give you practical advice on how to do this. But ultimately, this ties back to what we talked about in the Understanding Your Audience presentation, where we talked about cultural empathy. Because we must seek to understand your audience's behavior and their needs first. And we have to move away from the model of creating content that satisfies our own assumptions and what we like to do. We have to start where they are. Now, we all have our niche. So if you have a niche, that's fine. But we should not be creating content based on what we assume people need or what we think they need. We should ask them what their felt need is, because literally people are Googling for God. They're asking, is God real? Is the world ending? Is Russia World War III? Is this part of Daniel, 11:40 through 45? They're literally Googling these types of questions. People are trying to figure out what's going on in the world. They don't know if they're saved. They don't know what happens when they die, and they don't understand why they're suffering in the world. They see the image of the little boy crossing the border from the Ukraine alone and frightened, then they ask why. If there's a God, why? But here's the problem. When they go online and they look for these answers, our messages of hope and wholeness, the Adventist message, is absent. We are not present in the conversation. And today I'm going to tell you how to get present in the conversation, because I know all over the world, you guys who are creating content, who are creating sermons on a weekly basis, I know you're addressing the questions people are asking. But how do you make your content findable? And the other issue is, of course, people, are searching church online every month, but what do they find? They find mostly watching people in a building, and people searching for answers need more than a program to watch. They need us to get straight to the point. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the next presentation too. As I said before, we're following Jesus's model. We're not assuming what they need. We're asking what they need. We're meeting them where they are in their journey with whatever they think their burning crisis is, what their felt need is, what their challenge is, and then we're bidding them come and follow. And when we look a little closer at what Jesus actually did, if he is the model of the preacher or teacher, we can take a look at what he did, and we can use this to inform our content strategy. Because remember, last week we talked about how to develop the foundations of a digital strategy. But now we're getting into the content strategy, the content evangelism. And if we use, again, Jesus as the model, what did he do? He shared stories. He shared godly scripture-based wisdom. He attended to people's needs physically and spiritually. He answered their questions. And this is sort of the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about today. He gave them hope. He created community, and he developed an engaged, active church body. He led people to wholeness, and he equipped others to be disciples and to replicate the model he developed. So that goes all the way back to that first presentation of how to move your members from viewership to active digital discipleship. Because you can be the content creator engine, but then they can be the distributors. They can each become their own centers for positive influence. And a church that understands the potential in this area could be a powerful reach vehicle for souls. So why digital evangelism? Because it's a way to activate the entire church body. It's a way to help faith become relevant. You're meeting seekers where they are, and you're funneling them through to our message, and you're helping them to find as a wayfinder to God. So, what I'm doing here is I'm challenging you to think holistically. And all of these presentations, I've asked you to think holistically. Last time we talked about an integrative approach where every touch point, every point of content that you have, think about where the breakdowns are, where the opportunities are. Because when we fill in all these gaps, then you have a long term strategy for outreach, community service, and growth and evangelism. Because we can scale up our efforts so that your sermon has more value, has infinite evergreen value beyond the 30 to 45 to hour long, moment that you preached it in church this Sabbath. That it can minister to people indefinitely. And that is our goal, because somebody is searching every day. Somebody's searching for answers to the topic you addressed. And in this role that we're talking about, today I'm kind of focusing on, pastors and the kind of content that you're always creating. But again, you know, this role, the model has three prongs to it. You have the content creation. So that's your sermons, that's your Bible studies, that's your blog and the messages that you share with your congregation. Or if you're an individual doing ministry, it's the content you're creating. Then we have engagement, we have distribution. That's how you're sharing it. That's how you're distributing. This is how you're involving your church community. And of course, engagement. We're going to talk about how engagement and content creation must go hand in hand. Because if you put content out, you have to be ready and willing to answer them when people engage with you. And so the three elements are content creation. This is packaging those teachings into various digital friendly formats, such as video, blogs, images, and podcast. We talked about in the foundations of digital strategy how in the book you can take one single piece of content and you can repackage it across multiple different platforms so can stretch more value out of it. Because the more you hit people in different ways, that rule of seven, the more likely they are eventually to take action to engage with your piece of content. The more likely you're going to be to be able to pique their interest. And of course, engagement, that's the role. If you can't do it, create a team of people who can then be there to answer the questions in your inbox, to respond to the comments on your videos, all that kind of stuff. It's really important. It's a way to really determine meaningful ways to serve your community by actually engaging with people in distribution. That's just using digital tools and technologies to share content within your sphere of digital influence. And we talked a lot about what distribution looks like in that first presentation we covered. So that's just a little bit of a recap. So let's dig into content evangelism. Now, as I said before in one of the previous presentations, good communication is when we communicate in a way that our audience understands. So it goes back to the idea of cultural empathy and all the different ways, whatever platform they're on. If we start thinking about countries and cultures and generations and speaking to them in a way that they understand, and that requires adaptation. And it doesn't matter whether that's the physical mission field or the digital mission field. It requires that idea of cultural empathy. So never forget this. And I want to be clear because people get nervous. So they get nervous when I get up or I get online and I talk about digital evangelism and content evangelism. They think that it's a new message. But here's the thing, it's the same message and it's a new mission field. We just have to adapt a little bit. Because we're just using our content influence to show people how faith in God and his truth can improve their daily lives, because our message is ultimately the gospel, and our role as creatives, those of you who are producing content on a weekly basis, is to package those messages in a way that will connect with the audiences in the ways that they are comfortable with, in the ways they like to consume content and information, and in a way that is relevant and accessible. So this is where we're going to get into the practical application. Because again, I'm trying with everything I talk about with digital evangelism and discipleship, it's challenging this status quo. So if we know that 80% of even self-proclaimed Christians don't even attend church on a regular basis, let alone all the people who are unaffiliated, unchurched, or questioning or whatever, we have to think differently. Our content becomes the mission. And this is where we're starting to see the advent of more and more digital missionaries, where you can actually, all your content is online. Because at the end of the day, the question we have to ask is, what if your content is the only exposure to the gospel that some people receive? on a daily or a weekly basis. So the way we currently use digital communications, I think, is backwards. We're trying to always promote them to events. We're always trying to get them in the house. Or we're trying to create, when in fact we should be creating content that is meaningful and relevant to their daily lives and challenges. So let's see here. Now, and here's the thing we have to come in mind with, especially when we start really taking the digital mission field seriously. Some people would never come, but we can still touch their lives, or they might be just geographically too far away from your church to ever visit your church. So the question is, and this used to be a theoretical question, but now I ask it as a serious question because of COVID. Many churches, I know some churches that are still closed because of COVID. What would you post if your church service, your events, and your Bible studies did not exist? What would you want people to know about Jesus? Because no matter whether or not our churches exist, whether or not we can get together as a worship service in person or whatever that may come in the future, it's unpredictable. We are still called to preach the gospel. We are still called to teach, even without the church body and even without the building. And I think it's time we get beyond the building. So what would you do then if our churches did not exist? And that's what we have to figure out. And that's what we need to start doing intentionally, because ultimately we live our lives online. Because remember, the average person spends 9 to 18 hours a day behind a screen. And we have to break down those silos, because the lives we live online can greatly impact others through our digital influence. We can share the gospel and we can improve the lives of others with our digital influence. And in everything we do online, the life, the character, and the gift of Jesus Christ and God's character should be on display in our digital content and our interactions. Jesus came to uplift himself, but to reveal, not only uplift himself, but to reveal an accurate picture of God's character. Because our message is the gospel, not come to our next event, not come into our church. And it's not about how many followers we have, it's about how many people are following Christ, where they are in their journey. And it's about portraying the truth and preparing people for Christ's soon return. And we can use our digital tools and technologies to shape our messages and content around the felt needs of the people you're trying to reach, around the felt needs of your community, whether that community is just strictly online or whether that's your local community and where your physical church is. And as I said before, many of you are truly creating content that is addressing the felt needs of your community. And if you're not sure, go back to our understanding your audience presentation and dig into that and maybe think about ways you can branch out some of your content to address those felt needs, those challenges, and those core values. But we need to change the way we communicate our content online so that it lets people know that the content is relevant to their lives. And we got to make our content and our messages of hope and wholeness, our messages of Christ's soon return, our messages that do deal with our daily lives and challenges. We have to make that content findable. And we have to communicate its unique value proposition right up front so people will stop their scroll and engage with it in the moment. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but oftentimes we see sermons, and I've mentioned this before, that are labeled things like to seek and to save, or very vague, very broad, very very creative titles. It's great for poetry, but it's not great for communicating online. So we have to, when we focus on the mental, the physical, and the spiritual needs first, and then we can invite them to taste and see that the Lord is good. So what this means is that we are going to focus on creating shareable content. And the interesting thing is, the number one reason why people share content online is because they believe that content will improve the lives of others. Well, Christianity, we should be the leader in creating content that improves the lives of others. We are Adventists. We not only have the gospel and we have the teachings of, the entire Bible, but we also have the health message. We should be the leaders in creating content that improves the lives of others. And then the other top reasons why people share is to define themselves, to grow and nourish relationships, self-fulfillment, and to get the word out about causes they believe in. But As content creators of the Adventist Church, you should be able to easily satisfy all those reasons that makes content shareable, that makes content go viral. So we have a solid message, and it's up to us to package our messages so that they clearly meet this criteria. Because people are just scrolling through. We've got to let our content pop out in the news feed and to communicate quickly in a matter of seconds that we're answering their felt need, that our content is relevant, and that our content, if they stop and engage with it, will improve their lives. Because faith becomes relevant when people see how it can improve the way that they do life, when they can see that they can live their best life if they live that life with Jesus. Now, when we create content, our content must have purpose. So again, oftentimes we get into the content because we get into the rush of life and we have to reach our quotas or whatever. And so we're creating content to create content. And again, like I said, with our foundations of digital strategy, the end goal is not to be online. We have to ask ourselves, what are we trying to accomplish by being online? And the same thing, we have to ask a similar question when we create content. We have to ask, how will your audience change as a result of your piece of content? How will their attitude and perceptions of God change because of your piece of content? So you want to position your messages to not only be practical and address felt needs, but to create impact change. You're trying to improve their lives. And so this goes back to this idea of empathy and thinking like a seeker. Ask yourself when you're thinking about content, when you're trying to create content, is ask yourself, what questions might they have that you can answer? What questions could they have about your church or beliefs? And this is if you're acting in an evangelistic sense and you're trying to reach your neighbors, the people up the street from your church. What questions might they have about God? Because what might surprise you is some of those people who are outside your church, they're asking the same questions as the people in your church. Because remember, the lost coin was lost in the house. And so you have people in our pews who are questioning, who are uncertain, who are struggling. The problems in the church are the same outside the church. So also ask yourself, what would encourage them to attend a church or reach out to a Christian to better understand Jesus, salvation, or the Bible? What issues are they facing? What could encourage them in hard times? And what are their barriers to faith or barriers to entry in your church? Or if you're speaking to young people, at those at-risk young people, what questions might they have? What problems might they have that if you address will encourage them to stick and stay in the church, to give a relationship with Jesus another try? Because we can brainstorm all these different questions and all these different struggles, and then we can say, okay, how can I diminish these issues? How can I address these issues through our messages and through our engagement and through our community? We can, of course, tell stories because stories are, incredibly powerful tools to reach and connect with people. They enable us to discuss difficult truths that may be hard to hear in a way that draws our audience in and invites them to listen because stories are human. And what I love about stories is they don't tell us what to think, they give us something to think about. And stories don't tell us what to feel, they call us to feel. And in my experience, pastors are incredible storytellers. Yeah, and part of this is we have to connect with people's real experiences. Because we're going to win souls, then we have to address their lived experiences and help them do life better by embracing faith as relevant in their life. Because when we do that, our faith becomes relevant. And again, I know I talked about briefly in the past, like how when we candidly speak about the questions that people are asking and address those issues, they draw closer to us. So when it comes to digital evangelism, content is made to inform, educate, and inspire for the purpose of attracting and nurturing a lower audience that connects with your ministry's message. Because ultimately, if you help people solve a problem, they're going to be loyal to your brand. This is what Fortune 500 companies know. But the church, sometimes I think we've missed that. We've missed that. If we address the very problems in people's lives, if we help them solve the problems that they're dealing with, and we show them how faith can get them there, then they will become loyal. They will understand, they will value, and they will become part of our community. And as I said before, in this presentation, I'm mostly talking to pastors, but I'm talking to anybody who's a content creator, honestly. If you're an elder, whatever you are, a youth leader, doesn't matter. Much of what you creating or what you produce for your church and your ministries is content. You're creating sermons each week, studies for your small groups, blog posts, messages, videos, pictures from events. Always look for content that you are already creating and see how it can fit into your overall content strategy to reach your audience where they are. This isn't expensive, but it has long-term value. But again, it's about repurposing and repositioning what it is you produce, because valuable content will help your audience in a tangible way, either emotionally, physically, spiritually, or psychologically. But if you don't position your content right, they won't have the opportunity to engage with it. So this is where we start getting into that vernacular. You might have a piece of content, you might have a sermon, you might have a blog post that is very relevant to your community. And the way that you position it matters. So instead of choosing the creative titles that people aren't searching for, you can actually use top Google searches for inspiration and repackaging. So if you're looking for inspiration, you can go to Google, you can go to YouTube, and you can start typing, and you'll see that it'll autofill. And what this represents, these top searches represent the most popular search queries. So in other words, you're seeing what large numbers of people are actually searching for online. It gives you a sneak peek into their needs, their worries, nagging questions, and often hidden longings related to the topic that you want to create content about. And if we're strategic and we're intentional with the content create, we can provide people with the answers that they're yearning for. And for content you've already created, this may mean just retitling the content so it's clear what felt need is being addressed. And so the cool thing about this is this tells you the exact words people are using to search for the topic that you're writing on. So a good example of this, and I use my husband's sermon. He wrote a sermon some time ago, and he preached it, and it was to seek and to save. This is it's an example of a common message title. It is very relevant to the lives of people. It was specifically addressing a felt need, but its value is not clear the moment the reader sees the title of the video or the sermon, because it's vague. What does that mean? Nobody's searching to seek and to save. But what they are searching is, does Jesus want a relationship with me again? Or some variation of that. Does Jesus want a relationship with me again after I've sinned repeatedly? And when you title it, when you just make this tiny little tweak, the content is now going to get pulled up in search queries because it's something that's frequently being searched. And people will automatically know, hey, that is the actual question I'm asking. I want to listen to this message. I'm ready to sit down and listen to your message because it is specifically addressing the question I am searching for. But they would never find it if you kept it titled to seek and to save. They would never find it. It would just get lost somewhere on YouTube. And so if there's one thing that you remember from today's presentation, it's using the vernacular. It's titling your content the way people are searching for it. And of course, you can also just go to Google for inspiration. It's very, very helpful. The other thing you can do is that will also help with search engine optimization. And I've talked about this before in the last presentation, where you could take a piece of content and repackage it. And this is basically, you're using diversity of content to engage your audience. And it really helps search engine optimization, because when you use multiple forms of content, it maximizes your ministry's ability to get picked up in Google search algorithms. And it's a way to further engage your audience. So it's say they come in house, they listen to the sermon, they see the video posted later, they see a pull quote on a nice pretty image that they can share, they see a short little blog summary of it. It's a ways for them to repackage, reinforce, and to share. And then your congregation can also share that content in mind. Now, certain forms of content will perform better with some audiences than the others. So when you also diversify your content, it also optimizes your reach and increases your ability to have impact across a variety of demographics and age groups. Now, what kind of content you use will be based on your goals, your target audience, and what they actually respond to. Here's just some examples of different types of content. Again, you can take a sermon and you can add some copy to the website. You can have a blog. You can include a snippet in an email. You can have a testimonial as a type of content. Maybe that's part of a story that you talked about in your sermon. Little ebook. Maybe there's a little Bible study that somebody can download, and you can use that as a lead generator tool. Social media. Um, Checklist, if maybe your sermon's on like the best way to reconnect with God, like the 5 tips to reconnect with God. Of course, podcast. I know many churches have it where there's somebody in the congregation who takes the video of the sermon, pulls out the audio, and post it online as a podcast. Of course, you have the video and all these other ideas and stuff that you can use for content, different ways of repackaging. Now, the other thing for your social media, if you're feeling really stressed and daunted and overwhelmed, the cool thing is you can do a mix of created and curated. So you have your content that you're creating regularly, that is directed towards the mental, physical, and spiritual needs of your community. But it's like doing a research paper. You can also curate content that is also tied, that you also find will be relevant to your target audience, because then you're just pulling on different sources. Otherwise, you're just kind of writing a research paper with I, myself, and me as your sources. So if you have a social media following, and you have a Facebook group, you can also share content that is created by other Christian groups. Maybe it's created by the conference or the union or North American division or other ministries, but is also relevant to your community and your target audience. So the burden of creation is not all on you. And I see a lot of people who will obviously I can't see you guys, but they'll take an audible sigh of relief when they realize they don't have to create everything. No, you don't. Now, the other thing I like to let everybody know is that done is better than perfect, and people are drawn to authenticity. So, when you're creating content online, you can rely on resources like Canva. You can cut your video the best way you can. You do not want your resources or skill set limitations to prevent you from creating valuable content. And in fact, I actually think churches have sort of a huge advantage on creating content that is relatable and authentic. Like, as the pastor or the elder or whoever you are, or a youth leader, you can open up your phone and you can live stream a short message or tell a story, and it doesn't have to be professionally produced. It doesn't have to be perfect, because you have the advantage in the fact that you can showcase real people, authenticity, and community. That is what is important. So don't get caught up in perfection. Done is better than perfect. Just make sure that your content is relevant. And as I said before, it's more than content out, bodies in. We want to create content that helps move people through their spiritual journey. And you want to feed your community beyond the church service and provide spiritual guidance to those people who may never come to your church service for whatever reason. But you're feeding people along their spiritual journey with the type of content you're creating. Now, I will say, if there's some additional resources, um, I have some tips for creating social media posts. There's also the whole worksheet on understanding your audience. And then there's also writing effectively for online audiences that I think you'll also find very useful. There's a chapter in the book on that, but it's also on the old blog that I kept for North American Division. Now, I don't want to close without talking about real life, because I want to talk about some couple real life examples, so you have an idea of what it looks like and the potential, so that you understand that these are not just interesting theories that I have. And so if you follow these principles that I've been laying out for you, we can reach the world with our messages of hope and wholeness, because honestly, the mission field is wide open online. There is so much untapped potential. So the first case study I'm going to use is our own ministry, which is Angels in the Glen. It's a guide to Bible prophecy. It is intentionally geared towards non-Adventist. It is evangelistic. Both my husband and I are converts. So our target audience is literally us, like 15, 20 years ago. And all the imagery, all the content, all the languages, everything is geared outside. We hope that the content is also useful for Adventists, and we get a lot of positive feedback from Adventists, but they are not our target audience. So it's a resource for people seeking answers, who really want to understand what is happening, and to understand Daniel and Revelation. And this was also, in a sense, it's an opportunity for me, for my husband and I. We've essentially put our money where my mouth is. And the timing was in God's hand, because we literally launched this content right as COVID was closing everything down. There's no way we would have known that. Just the same as with the book I was writing. I literally finished it as COVID was shutting everything down, and we launched this ministry. And so this is just example. So the ministry is a website where people can sign up. They can download materials. We have ability to capture information. We also have a CRM built into the website, so we can communicate and track with people, and actually create reminders to follow up with people and all that cool stuff. But then the bulk of the content is actually hosted on YouTube. And I know that most of you, if not all of you, are streaming your weekly sermons. So, if what you have for your weekly sermons that you put so much time into, like I know pastors spend hours, like my husband, when he has to do a sermon, he doesn't preach every week, but it takes him hours and days, to put this stuff together. You could reach so much more people and minister to others who need this information indefinitely if you just follow these principles. And we're going to cover the specifics of this for YouTube in the next presentation, because your sermons, if positioned right, have evergreen value. So when we look at this, this is all content. This is just some of the examples from our breakdown of the book of Daniel. And all the titles are optimized for search. None of these titles are titled what I would want to call them, so to speak. There's no creative titling here. It's exactly what people are searching for when they're looking for that information. And it's based on the exact vernacular that people are using to find information on the topic. We use really compelling thumbnails, not fuzzy, weird thumbnails. And we utilize all the YouTube best practices that I'll break down next in our next section, which I think is in 2 weeks. But you see, they really pop out. The text is easy to read if you're on a mobile device. Everything is mobile friendly. And so this is what we've done, and these are the results. So we are over 700,000 views. We're going to hit 1 million quite soon. We have some videos that I think are over 55,000 views. We have over 9,000 subscribers on YouTube. We have, I think, almost 9,000 registered on our email list. We have 1,000 to 1,500 daily visitors to our website. And we have regular donors already. We respond to every email, every conversation, every interaction, unless they're like being hostile or whatever. And our YouTube channel is actually monetized, and then it's fit back in to create an ecosystem where it's a reinforcing loop. So we don't keep any money from it. We just pour it back in to reach more people through Google search. And so if you're asking how does this system work? It works extremely well. We're not even a church. We're a 2-person team, and we have nearly 1 million views in almost 2 years, which is really, really fantastic. That's more views than most Adventist churches have. Now, let me do this. Now, I do want to talk about a little bit about the seeker journey. So here's one example, and this is I chose this particular example because we're in heavy communication with her right now. I can call her Jane Doe or call her Barbara. It's a pretty vague name, and there's a lot of people that have the name Barbara, so I feel comfortable using her first name. But Barbara started interacting with us back in September. This is when she first started watching our videos, and she signed up on Angels in the Glen. So we created a lead generation form so we can get our email address. She started asking questions. She started commenting on the YouTube channel. We always respond. She'd ask really intense questions, and we started forming a relationship with her. And we discovered that she was the widow of a Baptist preacher. And over time, you fast forward 6 months later, and I would actually say this is pretty quick transition. She has decided to make a faith commitment. She now wants to keep the Sabbath, and she wants to go to an Adventist church. She's given a significant gift to the ministry, and we are now in communication with. I actually reached out to the Hospitable Adventist group on Facebook. We found 3 churches that are located very near to her and her location. We found one church in particular that we thought would be a really nice fit. Amazingly, it's a mile up the street from where she lives. And the cool thing is this church, it's a very diverse church, but most importantly, that there's diversity in background, meaning they just baptized a Methodist preacher couple. And they have several other people from Pentecostal backgrounds. They have unchurched people. They have basically, it's a church community that would much more probably easily than some Adventist churches welcome somebody coming from a different faith, because many people in this congregation have a different faith as a background. And so we've spoken with the sermon with the pastor and his wife. We've passed along the information. The pastor has called her. She searched them on YouTube. She listened to a couple of his sermons. And I think in the next week, she's actually going to walk through the doors of an Adventist church. So, what happened in between? What happened in between was we didn't just put content out. We were ready and we were there to answer her questions, engage with her, and form a relationship. And we were continuous and we were consistent. Because remember, in the past, I talked about your branding and consistency. And that when we think about a brand, it's actually brands are experienced, not created. So we thought holistically about the journey with her. We answered whatever question that she threw at us, and we kept making sure that we were consistent, that we were authentic, that we were building a relationship and meeting her where she was. And so now this is where she is. And she's not the only one. We've had this journey with many others. We have an entire family that has now decided to keep the Sabbath. They are 100 miles from any church. So they're keeping the Sabbath on their own. And we have a worldwide audience, but this is where it's not when I talk about content evangelism. Yes, it's about putting content out there and it's about positioning it, that about meeting those felt needs, but it's also about being with people on the journey. And another example I'll share real quick before we get into questions is we did a pilot last year with Mount Pisgah down in Florida, and it was an unchurched pilot. And okay. And so we were targeting towards about people within 50 miles of Mount Pisgah so that there's potential for that in-person interaction and ministry, because that was important to them. Now, this is a larger church, larger than most Adventist churches, so they have a little bit more resources. The people we were targeting was unaffiliated, unchurched, and questioning. And we wanted to fulfill a need to provide a Christian perspective for the real issues that people were facing in their community. So what we did here was a 3-month online program that ended up transitioning into like a prayer campaign. They were community-driven topics. So we actually used keyword research and sort of Google results to come up with content that people in the area were searching for. And we kept the images and the topics and the language was fresh, modern, and relevant. There were 2 pastors that did a really excellent job. We used Eddie Hippolyte and Bobby Bovell, and I think Bobby was in Czechoslovakia, like in Budapest, and Eddie was down in Australia. So this is the cool thing about a global church and about doing digital evangelism is you can tap into resources anywhere. They did a really great. They were very candid. They dealt with issues in the live Q&As very, very well. So what kind of topics did we end up doing? And some of these would not be topics I would have ever dreamed of. But we were doing the research. I trained the team on how to do some research as well. And we were just looking at what people were searching in the community. And there were things like, why does God say he exists? I would never have phrased it that way. How can I have a personal, intimate relationship with God? How can being spirituality help me live my life to the fullest? I think it meant spiritual. Sorry, that's a typo on my end. Does the Christian God love Black people? That one came up, and it came up more than once. And so we actually did a topic titled that. Um, and it really, the feedback we got from it was very powerful. Um, why did God allow sin if he's in control? How can a minority reconcile their faith with racism in the Bible? That was a huge one. How not to lose faith when you're hurting? Why are people leaving their faith? Why does being open to other viewpoints scare us? Why does God's expectation seems unreasonable? Christianity versus nationalism, the cancel culture in the church, and is friendship possible between a Christian man and a woman? So these are just a sampling of some of the contents we did. Now they had a limited budget, so we did a 3-month with the videos, but along that, we did a prayer campaign. So we used the candid conversations to launch a prayer campaign using the Google search ads. And we created teams. So we had a prayer team. We had people that were ready to answer questions because people could basically go to a form, fill it out on the website. We addressed whatever their felt needs were, and they hosted virtual Bible studies, and they ended up being very successful. 75 to 100 leads a month. They started a whole new Bible study group dedicated to this group. Now the problem is, because I just checked on them, so this started last summer. They're probably going to pause right now because they're dealing with volunteer fatigue. So my recommendation is, if you guys were to do something like this, is it can be highly successful. Google search advertising is highly powerful in this, but I would recommend, because of the other 20-80 rule, where 20% of the people do 80% of the work, this can be exhausting. And so I would recommend doing it in short bursts, like do it for 3 months. And work with those people, get them hopefully, part of the community and the church, address their felt needs, get them part of a Bible study, maybe once or twice a year, because it's not sustainable over the long term when you're dealing with volunteers. But that was also a very successful campaign. And in both cases, for Angels in the Glen and for Mount Pisgah, it was really sort of based on this foundation of optimizing our videos for search. And we're going to talk in depth about this in our next session. So I'm actually going to kind of just skim over this so we can get to questions today, because I'm sure you have a lot of questions. If you want to learn more, there's a whole book. I wrote the Digital Discipleship and Evangelism Guide. There's also free resources on my website. If you want to learn more about our digital ministry, it's angelsintheglen.org. And now we can go to a Q&A if we're ready. I can't hear, but if you guys can hear me, the presentation is going to be available to download, and there's also additional resources that go with this. There's a worksheet on content evangelism that you can download.
Fantastic. Now, I'm kind of curious. Sitting here, I've looked a little bit at Angels in the Glen. From a say, I want to create some content. How long does it take you to do one of your presentation videos? And what kind of, are you talking top-notch equipment, or is it something that most people could purchase, or pastors could purchase in a local church?
Yeah. So, nowadays you have YouTube influencers who are using their iPhone, because iPhones can now shoot in 4K. So it depends on what your budget is, what kind of equipment you want to use. For the most of the videos that you see up there now, we actually used a friend's video content who was a professional videographer. And but now we've actually purchased our own equipment because we had a donor who donated. And so the equipment that we have now, we have 6K cameras. But again, all those prices are coming down. Amazing. I think our cameras were $4,000 a piece. That's still pretty hefty for a lot of people. But again, your iPhone, a new iPhone, can shoot in 4K. So as far as the type of content, I think our videos
what about time in terms time in terms of writing the script and coming up with the content to actually shooting? What kind of time does it take to do that on your end?
So from our end, my husband's been teaching this content for many, many years. So it was really just a matter of us just polishing up sort of his presentation slides and him running through it a little bit. So right now we're actually getting ready to shoot another episode. It takes him a couple of weeks to come up with this type of teaching content because we also have study guides and stuff to download, and he uses Prezi for a presentation. So it takes him, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks to put something together, and then we film it, and then I can edit it in about 2 or 3 days. Um, but we have sort of like a formula for like a pace now. And so I think our next he told me yesterday that I think our next video that's going to go up is probably going to be about an hour's worth of content. And the thing you should know is a lot of people get really nervous because they're like, oh, well, we should really be coming up with short content, like 5-minute content, 10-minute content. You can, if you have, talent or skill for that, but don't shy away if you have longer form teaching content, because YouTube favors long content, it favors longer videos as far as helping with your search engine optimization. But also, people watch it. If your content's good, they watch it.
Question about what software she uses to do the editing for the videos.
So someone wants to know the software package that you use to edit the videos.
Okay, so this is not one I recommend. I know that sounds really strange because it's one we use. It's a huge learning curve. We use DaVinci Resolve, but you can use it for free. It's very sophisticated. But, I know a lot of YouTubers that are using, you know, the things already built in. Like for a lot of my short videos and stuff that I cut, I use Movavi. So, and that's just like the Microsoft version of Movie Maker, and then of course you have like the I version. There's also Adobe Pro. There's a lot of different softwares you can use. We do use DaVinci Resolve. I like it, but I'm also an extremely technical person. I know people who produce content better than me that use simpler programs. You do not have to use it. I'm just a very technical person. But if you want to check out DaVinci Resolve, there are lots of communities online. There's a lot of free videos online, and you can actually download it for free. You do need to have a computer that is pretty robust to run this level of video editing software. So I actually have, and I do not game, I have a gaming computer. Because I needed the amount of memory basically to run it.
So I'm assuming it's a PC, not a Mac.
Yes, I'm a PC girl because I like to be able to control things and get into the weeds and code and stuff like that. So I'm a PC girl. So yeah, I'm a girl who
She
codes.
should be using Linux.
All right. It's funny the arguments that go back and forth with PC Mac people that do video editing and all that kind of stuff. So I'm glad to hear you're a PC person.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. Use however your brain works. So people get into these arguments. This is a side topic. People get into these arguments of PC versus iPhone. For my phone, it's an iPhone. My iPad is obviously an iPad. I like them for usability, for fun. But when I get into technical stuff, it's a different way of thinking. So people who like Mac, it's how their brain works. People who like PC, it's how their brain works. And guess what? Neither one is better. It's just how you operate. I tell people, like, my brain operates differently, so
She's like Switzerland. She handled that like Switzerland, right down the middle, not coming on either side. That was good.
well, I see people
Any
produce
other
great
questions?
content
Um,
on either.
Yeah.
should I tell you the question?
Yeah,
I think she can hear
Yeah,
you.
she can hear.
Okay. So you mentioned you guys made like a prayer meeting, virtual prayer meeting, and then you guys had a lot of success in leads. Did you
Yes.
guys did something special to centralize the community that is within, like, it's not, we don't want like all contacts from all the world, but how do you get something local?
Yeah. So for Mount Pisgah, what we did is we actually used Google search ads. So what this is Google search advertising. It's very, very cheap. I highly recommend it. If you want to do a prayer campaign, you want to do something like this, you can contact me. I can talk you through how to set it up. But essentially you set the location and you set the search query. So anybody in this case, and I've set this up for other churches too, looking for prayer, looking they have questions about the Bible, whatever, they will get served within the radius. Like you could say within 10 miles of my church, anybody searching for prayer, anybody who has questions about the Bible, I want my church website to pop up with my little prayer campaign and our prayer warriors. They could fill out a little form and someone will be in touch with them. So you actually can do it geographically. So within 10 miles of your church or whatever the radius is. If you're not densely populated, I would encourage you to go a little further out. And they get served up your prayer warriors page. You'd have to create a landing page. They can submit a form, and then you create a system within your church, like your elders or your prayer team that reaches out to them, starts building the relationship, answers any questions they might have, stuff like that. So that is
You create a
geographic.
landing page? You created the landing page, or who helped you to do the landing page where they can sign up?
So you
Or
have
how
to
to?
create a landing page on your website. So with Mount Pisgah, their web person created a landing page. If for some reason you don't have any ability to do that on your website, you can actually use a Google form. You could send people to a Google form to request prayer. It looks better if it's on your website, just so they can kind of see who it's coming from. But you can just send them to a landing page on your website that you create that has a little bit of information about prayer, and that you have prayer warriors available and people willing to answer their questions that they might have about the Bible and faith. They fill out a little form, contact form, and then somebody from your team, your congregation, gets back with them.
Mm. I have another question. I don't know.
Alright.
I don't know if we have.
Absolutely. We got time for
Okay.
a great question.
For a great question. Okay, so here's the great question everyone was waiting for. No, like you mentioned, many of our churches are doing live stream now.
Mhm.
Some with better quality, some with, not so much
Mhm.
good quality. But what is your recommendation, and how can we make the live stream for people more appealing? Because I know that you
Mhm.
can, use your phone and all that stuff. But is there
Mhm.
something that you have, like an idea that you can give us, like some tips that you can give us to make it more appealing in
Well,
the
it
live
depends
stream
on
context?
I if you're in the live stream context. So in that case, your target audience is probably the community you already have. So you wanna make sure, like, if you're speaking in a live stream, I this is really off-putting when the speaker is speaking and they're far away behind the podium and you can't really see them. When you're speaking, the camera should be able to pick up the whites of your eyes. It should be close enough to the speaker that it looks like they're talking to the person on the other side of the screen face to face.
So we're not doing a
Um,
good job here with time.
yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah, you got the
No,
camera should be much,
that's all
much
right, Jamie. That's all
closer.
right.
Yeah,
Yes, come
that's why we need
closer.
to ask
So they should be
questions.
able to see your expression. You're still not close enough. Your face should fill this little square here. Um, like my
You're
face
the only
is.
person that believes that, Jamie.
No, no,
Right.
because when you're talking to people, make sure you've like trimmed your nose hairs, but like,
Oh,
just
let's see there.
get closer. People want to see, they want to express, nobody likes the way we look on the screen, but you want to fill the screen. They want to feel like, you're talking to a person, um, and not some person
The
far
studio helping.
away behind a podium. And they're talking to a person, like they're FaceTiming or something with you. That's sort of the big thing. And then get as best quality as you can for a camera. If you don't have high quality, then at least zoom in so that they can see you. They can see your expressions. They can see what you're saying. The other thing, and we're going to actually talk about this next week, so I don't want to spoil it too much, but your live streaming is really for the people that are already part of your community. So one thing I strongly recommend is when you do your sermon, and you can also pull out your health nuggets and you can pull out your child service, but when the sermon is done, then have somebody at your church, or if it's you or whoever, extract just the sermon and repost it and do all the best practices that we're going to talk about next week. And if you have a really good children's story program and you do like little health nuggets, those could all be pulled out and created as separate content to feed the algorithm of YouTube and Google. And it's much more because people who are seeking for answers, they really don't want to listen to your church announcements. And then usually, I hate to say it, guys, but the hymns are very badly mic'd. And then they have to go through like 45 minutes of home church stuff and poorly mic'd singing before they even get to your message. And so
Answers.
after the sermon's done, pull out the message, repost it, and you're going to get much better results from seekers. You're going to start getting people finding it from around the world, because what they don't want to do is like click on it and then scroll around. Like they want to click on it and there's the message. You jump right into
So
it.
you're saying it is all right to live stream the church service, but later do the just sermon thing.
Yeah, just cut it out. And there's some people you'll listen to and they'll say, "Oh, you shouldn't live stream. Nobody wants to hear it." The community wants to hear it. Your community, your church wants the live stream. But when it comes to your message, cut it out and repost it later.
All right, Ernesto, since it wasn't a great question, Richard's gonna end us with a great question.
Okay, so is that complicated to get just the sermon out of we have a long service, goes 2 hours.
Uh-huh.
So I want to be able to do that. Is that a complicated process?
Nope. So what I do for our actually local church is there's like 3 of us that do this. We just go and we download the sermon off of YouTube. I pop it into Movavi, which is a really simple video editor. I cut out the sermon and then I re-upload it and I follow all the best practices that we're going to talk about next week. So the long answer is no, it's not complicated, but you want to make sure you do all the best practices. So tune in next week.
There you go, see? She's gonna leave you hanging, Richard.
Oh, boy.
Good deal. Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Jamie, for all of the great wisdom and best practices you continue to share with us. And what is it, 2 weeks? We've got her last one,
March 26th.
March 26th. So I'm going to invite all of our online audience, those of you who are here, to pray with me as we end. But again, thanks, Jamie. Father, we thank you for the opportunity we have to come and to learn how to best reach the world. Lord, as we talked about at the very beginning, angels would long to do this. You could have the rocks cry out. Lord, you've given us the opportunity to do that. So, Father, I just thank you for this learning. We thank you for the Sabbath. We thank you for Jamie and for her presentation. We thank you for using Nathan and I as we shared earlier today. And Lord, we pray your blessing upon us as we begin another week, as we lose our hour sleep this evening. Lord, we look forward to another good week, sharing and showing the love of Jesus with others, because it's in his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank
Thank
you,
you, Jamie.
guys.